The strangest thing about modern work is that almost everyone says focus matters, and then many workplaces are designed as if focus personally insulted the founder's family. Open offices, endless messages, last-minute meetings, dashboards, status updates, the sacred ritual of just checking in, where no one knows what is being checked, but everyone agrees to be interrupted anyway. Welcome. In this second part of Deep Work, we move through Newport's argument that deep work is rare and meaningful. The book is not just saying distraction happens. It is saying modern work often mistakes visible activity for valuable output, and that mistake slowly trains people away from the work that matters most. Newport begins the chapter on rarity with examples from Silicon Valley and knowledge work culture. Open offices became fashionable because they seemed to promise collaboration, transparency, and energy. The problem is that human concentration is not a decorative plant you can place anywhere and expect it to thrive. Put people in noisy environments, surround them with interruptions, and then act surprised when hard thinking becomes harder. That is not innovation. That is acoustics with a marketing department. The book challenges a common belief. If people are constantly connected, they must be collaborating better. Newport argues that this is often false. Constant communication can help with some kinds of work, but it also creates a tension residue. When you switch from one task to another, part of your mind remains stuck on the previous task. You may be physically present in the next activity, but mentally, pieces of you are still arguing with the old email, the old message, the old tab, the old question. This is why quick switching is so expensive. The cost is not only the minutes spent answering the message. The cost is the broken state of mind after the message. A 2-minute interruption can damage the next 20 minutes of thought. The calendar may show that you return to the task immediately. Your brain, however, is not a spreadsheet. It does not snap cleanly back into depth because you clicked the right window. Newport also describes the principle of least resistance. In many workplaces, if there is no clear system for valuing deep output, people drift toward behaviors that make the day easier in the moment. They answer emails quickly. They hold meetings to avoid ambiguity. They use chat to ask questions that could have been solved with a little thought. They make themselves available because availability is easier to measure than contribution. This is painfully familiar. A person can spend the day being extremely responsive and still produce nothing that would matter a month later. But responsiveness feels good. It provides little hits of completion. Reply sent. Box checked. Message cleared. Congratulations. You have moved a pebble from one pile to another. The mountain remains undefeated. The book is not cruel about this. Newport understands why people behave this way. Shallow activity is often rewarded because it is visible. Deep work is harder to see while it's happening. A person thinking quietly may look idle. A person frantically replying to messages looks committed. The tragedy is that the second person may be performing productivity while the first person is actually producing it. Newport's criticism of metrics is also important. In many knowledge work jobs, it is difficult to measure the value of deep output directly. When metrics are unclear, workplaces fall back on proxies. Hours online, number of meetings, speed of response, volume of communication, visible busyness. These proxies are easy to observe, but often poor measures of real value. If you reward the proxy long enough, the proxy becomes the job. This is where the book becomes a little dangerous in a good way. It asks whether the workplace habits we treat as normal are actually rational. Do we really need all these meetings? Do we really need instant replies? Do we really need everyone in the loop? The phrase "in the loop" sounds harmless until you realize that many people spend their careers trapped inside loops that never produce anything except more loops. Newport calls out the culture of connectivity because it creates the appearance of intelligence. A fast email reply can look like competence. Being reachable can look like dedication. But if your role requires original thought, then constant reachability may be a liability disguised as professionalism. It is hard to build something substantial if every 10 minutes you must prove you are alive on a messaging platform. The rarity of deep work is not only caused by bad offices or bad tools. It is also caused by our own appetite for distraction. Shallow work feels safer. Deep work exposes us. When you sit with a hard problem, you quickly discover what you do not understand. When you try to write something clear, you discover the fog in your own thinking. When you attempt to learn a difficult skill, you meet your limits without the comforting background music of multitasking. That is one reason people flee into shallow tasks. They're not always lazy. Sometimes they're avoiding the discomfort of honest effort. The inbox is useful here because it always offers a respectable escape. Nobody says, "I avoided my real work for 2 hours." They say, "I was catching up on email." Very professional. Very tragic. After explaining why deep work is rare, Newport argues that deep work is meaningful. This is one of the strongest parts of the book because it moves beyond productivity. Newport uses examples of craftsmanship, including people who work with their hands, to show that deep engagement can give work a sense of dignity. When someone gives full attention to a craft, the work becomes more than output. It becomes a way of ordering the mind. The blacksmith example in the book is especially useful. A craftsman shaping metal is not merely completing tasks. He is engaged with material, resistance, skill, and judgment. Newport sees a lesson for knowledge workers here. Even if your material is code, strategy, words, numbers, designs, or decisions, you can still approach it as craft. The work becomes meaningful when you give it your best attention. This matters because knowledge work can easily become abstract and fragmented. You may finish a day with no visible object in your hand. Your work may be scattered across documents, calls, messages, and decisions. Without depth, the day can feel unreal, like you were busy inside a fog machine. Deep work gives shape to the fog. It lets you point to something and say, "This is what my mind made." Newport draws on psychology and philosophy to argue that what we pay attention to shapes our experience of life. If your attention is constantly pulled toward triviality, your life will feel trivial, even if your circumstances are impressive. If your attention is repeatedly invested in meaningful difficulty, your life gains depth. This is not mystical. It is practical. Your life is the sum of what you attend to. If you spend the day in fragmented half-attention, you experience a fragmented life. If you spend part of the day deeply engaged with something worthy, the day feels more substantial. The mind needs absorption. It needs the relief of doing one thing fully. Here the book quietly attacks a modern fantasy, the belief that we can keep all options open and still live deeply. We want to check everything, respond to everyone, monitor every feed, follow every trend, and somehow also produce masterful work. It is a lovely dream, like wanting to become a concert pianist while practicing only during elevator rides. Depth requires trade-offs. To say yes to deep work is to say no to some shallow availability. Newport also argues that deep work can create a kind of secular meaning. You do not need to romanticize your job or pretend every task is a calling. But when you regularly push your abilities towards something valuable, you experience a form of satisfaction that shallow activity rarely provides. You're not simply consuming stimulation. You're shaping yourself through effort. For many viewers, this is the part that may land hardest. The problem is not just that distraction hurts productivity. The problem is that distraction can make life feel less alive. You move from screen to screen, update to update, reaction to reaction, and at the end of the day, you know many things but have touched almost nothing deeply. The soul was not built to live entirely in notification previews. Newport's answer is not nostalgia. He is not saying the old world was perfect. He is saying we need to recover a skill that modern conditions are eroding. The deep worker is not anti-modern. The deep worker is selective. They use tools, but they refuse to let tools define the shape of their attention. This changes how we think about ambition. Ambition is not just wanting a better title or more income. Real ambition may require protecting the conditions under which your best work can appear. That means fewer automatic yes, fewer casual meetings, fewer default interruptions, more blocks of uninterrupted time, more clarity about what actually creates value. Newport's first 3 chapters form a complete case. Deep work is valuable because it helps you learn and produce at an elite level. Deep work is rare because modern work culture often rewards shallow busyness. Deep work is meaningful because focused effort gives shape and dignity to a life. Together, those ideas create a challenge. If deep work is valuable, rare, and meaningful, why are you treating it like an optional hobby to squeeze in after email behaves itself? Email will not behave itself. The shallow world does not politely step aside. It expands until you build walls. The practical question after this episode is not, do you like the idea of focus? Everyone likes the idea of focus. It sounds noble, like drinking water or reading the terms and conditions. The real question is, what shallow behaviors are currently receiving your best hours, your quickest obedience, and your emotional energy? This question should be asked without drama. The goal is not to shame yourself for having email, meetings, or digital tools. The goal is to see the true pattern. For 1 week, you could track the moments when your attention breaks. Not perfectly, just honestly. What pulled you away? Was it required? Was it avoidable? Did it produce value? Or did it only produce motion? Newport's argument becomes stronger when you notice how often shallow work hides behind respectable language. A meeting becomes alignment. A message becomes collaboration. A dashboard becomes visibility. A thread becomes transparency. These things can be useful, but they can also become masks. If no important decision is made, no hard problem is solved, and no valuable work becomes easier, the noble label does not rescue the activity. The book also makes us question the social pressure of busyness. In many offices, being overwhelmed becomes a status symbol. People trade exhaustion like credentials. I am slammed becomes proof of importance. But Newport's framework asks a colder question. Slammed by what? If you are overwhelmed by meaningful work, that is one problem. If you're overwhelmed by low-value coordination, that is another. The first may require capacity. The second requires redesign. This is where the chapter on meaning matters. Deep work is not only a way to win economically. It is a way to stop living as a collection of reactions. When you work deeply, you experience continuity. One thought leads to another. A problem slowly opens. A rough idea becomes clearer. You see the effect of sustained attention. That experience is satisfying because it gives the mind a story. I entered confusion, stayed long enough, and made something better. Shallow work rarely gives that feeling. It gives closure, but not depth. It gives small completions, but not always meaning. That is why a day of shallow tasks can be exhausting and strangely unsatisfying. You did many things, but you may not have become more capable. You may not have moved anything important. You may simply have kept the machinery warm. Newport's craft argument is helpful because it gives knowledge workers a better identity. Instead of being a professional responder, you can become a craftsperson of thought. Your material may be abstract, but your standards can be concrete. Is the argument clearer? Is the code simpler? Is the lesson stronger? Is the decision better reasoned? Is the design more useful? Is the analysis more honest? Those questions bring dignity back to work. They also create resistance against shallow culture. If you see yourself as a craftsperson, you become less willing to let random interruptions handle your tools. You would not let strangers wander into a workshop and move the blade while the craftsperson is cutting. Yet knowledge workers allow the mental equivalent all day long. This does not mean rejecting teamwork. It means designing teamwork around respect for attention. The best teams do not necessarily communicate constantly. They communicate clearly at the right times, with enough context to reduce confusion rather than multiply it. Good collaboration should create more depth for everyone, not less. Newport's discussion of meaning also gives the viewer a way to judge work from the inside. Ask whether your workday leaves you with the feeling of having shaped something. Not necessarily something large, famous, or perfect, just something clearer, stronger, more useful, or more true than it was before. That feeling is different from the feeling of having survived a wave of obligations. This is why deep work can be satisfying even when it's hard. During the session, it may feel demanding. After the session, the mind often feels cleaner. You made contact with a real problem. You stayed. You moved it. That kind of satisfaction is hard to get from grazing on updates. Shallow work may produce relief, but deep work produces pride. There's a warning here for ambitious people. If you build your whole identity around being busy, depth will feel threatening. Depth may force you to do fewer visible things. It may make you less instantly responsive. It may require saying no to activities that give social proof but little value. In the short term, that can feel risky. In the long term, it may be the only way to produce work that actually distinguishes you. The book is asking for a different kind of seriousness. Not seriousness as grimness. Not seriousness as pretending to be above fun, which is usually just boredom in a nice jacket. Seriousness means giving important work the conditions it deserves. If the work matters, it cannot always be done in the leftovers between interruptions. That is the real bridge into the rules section of the book. Once you accept that deep work is valuable, rare, and meaningful, the next question is no longer whether focus sounds nice. Of course it sounds nice. So does financial freedom and 8 hours of sleep. The question is whether your daily system is built to make it happen when life becomes ordinary again. Deep work asks you to stop confusing accessibility with usefulness. Your value is not measured by how quickly you can be interrupted. Your value is measured by what you can create, solve, learn, and contribute when your mind is actually present. Thank you for watching this second part. In the next episode, we will move into Newport's first practical rule: work deeply. That is where the book shifts from diagnosis to design, and where focus stops being a nice idea and becomes a schedule, a ritual, and a discipline. Until then, look at your workday honestly. If the shallow tasks have built a luxury apartment in the middle of your attention, it may be time to raise the rent.